Hey guys, welcome to the hypertrophy training module, and now we're moving on to volume, intensity, and frequency. So we've covered the mechanisms of hypertrophy and also looking at your needs analysis and what you need for adherence, sustainability, and just to enjoy your program, which is your most foundational thing, that you need a program that you're gonna like and you can stick to, and that consistency is what's gonna really deliver a result over time. We're gonna move into our next tier now of what's very, very important in the next aspect of your training. So in this lesson, we're going to look at the interrelation of volume, intensity, and frequency, and they all affect one another. And we'll look at volume, how to measure volume, because there's several different ways, then also the dose response curve of volume and what it means to what we're doing for hypertrophy training. Is all volume created equal? Can there be more effective or less effective volume? Should you train heavy or light? Should you be training to failure or not to failure? What about stimulating reps or effective reps? How to count that volume for exercises. And then we'll get into picking your training split. And finally, we'll just look at an example of how to implement volume, intensity, and frequency and make sure that meets up with what we really need to pair to the hypertrophy tenets. And so throughout this, you should be able to look at any hypertrophy program and see if you meet the volume, intensity, and frequency components, and if a program is set up correctly, or if it's not, or if it's missing components. So this should be the basic nuts and bolts of your hypertrophy programming. So just to nail some definitions, and we've covered these in the last lecture we went through, but for stimulus. So remember, our main driver for the mechanism of hypertrophy is mechanical tension. So it should be in the back of our minds of what we're trying to do when we go in the gym is create as much internal tension in the muscle as possible. And so what can affect those things? The exercise type and execution. That's going to focus that stimulus in a certain area. So if we're doing a squat, or what type of squat we do and how we execute that squat is going to determine where the stimulus is directed, whether it's more to glutes or quads, and the quality, right? If we have some really bouncy form and we're just trying to cheat reps, like you might not be producing as much stimulus as possible. Then the intensity and effort. So there's two aspects to this. Intensity being absolute and also relative. So it might be how heavy you are lifting, the actual load you're holding in your hand, but then also how hard you're lifting, the relative effort to yourself, which will be the magnitude of that stimulus. Then we'll have volume, which will be the dosage of stimulus, and the frequency is how we organize that stimulus. So this is going to be your training split. And I can't drive home enough, guys. The main things when I have people come to me, the things I see is execution is poor. And a lot of times we have good exercises in choice, but they're just done so poorly, and that the quality of stimulus is not there. Next part is training hard. You have to train as hard as possible and take your sets to that point of where you can maybe barely get another rep, or you get to that point where you actually fail. Training hard is going to get you most of the way there in your results. But that has to be under the premise that execution is as tight as you can manage it. There is some wiggle room within this. But these two components, in my opinion, are some of the areas within training and program which you should put the most emphasis. Now, there is importance within volume and frequency. You have to do enough volume, right? If I told you just to go do one set, or should you be going in and do 20 sets like this that are just really hard? What's the right amount? So that is important, but it must come with the preface that the effort level has to be there with the right execution. Then once we establish that, we should be in saying how much of that should we be doing. So we want the quality to be high, and then do the number of subsequent volume amount needed from there. And the frequency is just going to be how we organize all that and putting that into your training split. So all four of these variables are interdependent of one another. Each one will affect the other one. Colin was briefly talking about this. But for instance, if you are taking all your sets to failure, you're not going to be able to do 20 sets a week. Or if you trained like really far from failure, like 3 reps away from failure, those sets aren't going to be as hard. They won't be as taxing. So you're probably going to have to do more of those sets. So that would mean you could do more volume, but your effort level would be low. Same thing if you have like this excellent execution with your exercises, right? Your form's on point, you can really focus tension where you need it. That per set stimulus will be really high. So you probably wouldn't need as many of those sets. Now, if you're really sloppy in your form, you might not stimulate that muscle that much. You might need a lot of those sets, but of course there's a whole other issue of fatigue to manage as well. So part of this is training to failure with heavy loads will limit the number of sets you're able to perform. That would increase recovery time as well. But what we want to do within these components, and the exercise type and execution is going to be the next lecture that we get into. But for right now, we're going to focus on intensity, volume, and frequency and programming those since they are more elementary nuts and bolts areas. But the right combination of these 3 variables is what we want to do to give the optimal stimulus, manage recovery, and keep sustainability. So this is always what we're thinking about. How much stimulus can we give in a workout session with the thought that we need to recover and do that again? So you don't want so much stimulus in a session, but the recovery is so substantial you can't come and train again for like another week. You also don't want so little stimulus that you don't do enough in that session to actually create the adaptation. You also don't want your stimulus, your execution and how you're lifting to be so poor that the stimulus isn't great, but you just make a ton of fatigue. And so now you just never have productive training. So we have to manage all 3 of these variables appropriately to get the most result that we can. So first, let's talk about volume. And there's a few different ways you can quantify volume, and it's been looked at differently in the literature. And the first one we could look at would be volume load, which volume load is just your weight times your reps times your sets. So if you did 100 pounds, you lifted for 10 reps for 3 sets, you could total that volume load up to 3,000 pounds. Another example is if you did 120 pounds for 5 reps for 5 sets, that would total up to 3,000 pounds. Now, the question would be, is 3,000 pounds is the same, correct? But you did 3 sets of 10 versus 5 sets of 5 to accomplish that. Does that create a different hypertrophy response? And we can answer that question shortly. The other volume way we can count will be the total number of reps that you performed. So if you did 5 sets of 10, that would be, let's say, 50 reps. We could look at our previous example in volume load. 10 sets of 3, that's 30 reps, or 5 sets of 5, that's 25 reps. So the total number of reps might be a way that we could count volume. And this was some prescriptions previously done before we got down to number of total sets. You might say, oh, you need 80 reps in a workout session. Now, number of total sets. So this way is just purely counting how many sets you performed. And this might be the number of just hard sets that you do. And we'll have to define what is a hard set. But the research has found a dosage response relationship only between the number of sets performed in hypertrophy, irrespective of other variables. So volume, the dosage of this, is the most predictive thing of hypertrophy. They've looked at trying to equate volume load, and that isn't a predictor of hypertrophy. Number of sets is. So for instance, your 3 sets of 10, your 3 sets versus your 5 sets of 5. Your 5 sets of 5, equating just for number of sets, would probably have more hypertrophy effect. And even though the volume load is equal. So if we said volume load is all that matters, and like, well, the volume load's the same, hypertrophy is going to be the same. Well, it's not what we found in the research. What matters is the number of hard sets. And so 5 sets has a greater hypertrophy effect than just doing 3 sets. And so this would be the same for reps, because the reps would be different in these. Actually, 5 times 5 for your 5 sets of 5 is 25 reps. It's actually less than your 3 sets of 10. You'd be doing less reps, but it's a greater hypertrophy response. And this comes back to what we're looking at, our mechanical tension being our main driver for hypertrophy, which as long as you are going close enough to failure, and you're within this like 6 to 20, 25 rep range, all those sets are stimulating for hypertrophy. So it doesn't matter if it's a set of 6 or a set of 10 or a set of 15, all those sets are going to stimulate hypertrophy. It might be a little different for strength or muscle endurance. There's a little bit extra that might come along with those, but we've looked at studies where we look at these different rep ranges, and truly what matters is that you just do a hard set. So number of sets is what matters for dosing hypertrophy. And so this volume is going to determine the dosage of mechanical tension provided. So there is a dose response to the number of sets. So let's look at this dose response. And what we've seen in the literature is that there is an inverted U curve regarding volume. There's a lot to be said about volume. It's been the hot topic lately, how much volume to do. And I want to make sure that you know, and I'll keep emphasizing this, that hard sets is what's going to give the mechanical tension the primary driver mechanism of hypertrophy. Okay? From that point on, then we will look at how many of those sets that you need. Right? So it's not just do enough sets. These sets have to be quality and hard for that to matter. Now looking at this chart, you'll see that in the literature, if you do no sets, you're not going to have any growth. If you do a couple more sets, that would increase the rate of growth. Then at some point, at the top of this U, there's an optimal amount of sets where you're going to grow the most off this number. Now, if you keep doing more sets, you see that chart starts to drop, and you are no longer able to recover from that amount of set. And if you remember go back to our fitness fatigue model, right? When you go train, you make a stimulus, and with that stimulus comes amount of fatigue. And until you remove that fatigue, you won't be able to see those adaptations come to your training. So you won't see growth, you won't see this like strength be unveiled. So if you're training way beyond your means, and you're always in this high state of fatigue, then you come to your next training session and you can't progress your lifts and you're weaker. That stimulus will be less and you'll start losing muscle. If you're weightlifting less weight and less reps, you are losing muscle. So too much volume is a thing. So you need the right amount. And we want to be able to train within our recovery capacity. So we don't want to be optimal might not even be like the optimal amount for you because of your recovery. It might be the optimal amount for that stimulus for you to grow, but if you can't recover from that stimulus, then that'll be limiting in itself. But I want to go back to the point that not all sets are created equal when looking at this, because this curve has been based on a lot of different studies compiled together. And some of these are in beginners, some of them are intermediates, some are training to failure, some are not training to failure, some have short rest times or long rest times, and all those factors matter for how many sets is needed to be optimal. All right? So why are all sets not created equal? Well, first off, let me say it's all about the stimulating reps. So this is like we talked about, those last reps before you get to failure. Rep failure, those are the reps that really, really matter. So how does this matter for like exercise choice and execution? And this comes down to stimulus and fatigue, right? So what does a set of leg extension look like versus one set of squatting? Is that the same set? One set of quads? It's not, right? Like if I told you do a set of leg extension and versus a set of quads, you're going to grow the same. You'd say, there's no way. You get way more growth out of a set of squats. And the stimulus and fatigue is something that we have to weigh out. And with a set of squats, you're also going to have like loading in your glutes, your erectors, maybe in your traps because you're stabilizing, or your biceps because you're squeezing so hard, right? So there's a lot of stimulus occurring in a lot of different muscle groups, which is going to make a lot of fatigue, right? So these compound lifts, it's more a larger systemic stimulus, but also a larger systemic fatigue level. So these sets are not equal, and what that's going to do to subsequent sets will be affected as well. Then also, a beginner and advanced lifter are going to be able to execute these sets a lot differently and have a lot different muscle connection. So from a beginner, you're just kind of lifting, you don't really know what you're feeling, you're just trying to figure out these lifts. It's not very precise, you haven't had the motor learning occurred to where you're very efficient recruiting motor units. So the stimulus for one set for a beginner is just not that high as far as their focus. It's high because it's so novel to them. And so that's another component. To the advanced lifter, they're extremely precise. So their tension and their stimulus is very high per set. Also, they're very trained. So in another aspect of it, that stimulus isn't as much, in a sense, rep for rep as you become advanced. So you have to get to those harder reps. Then we also have absolute and relative effort. So I've talked about this, hard sets, right? So one set to failure versus one set like 3 reps shy of failure. Those last reps get more stimulating as you get close to failure versus not. So it's very different if you're doing a set of failure or not. Even using 90% of your 1 rep max, that would be like doing like a 3 repper, versus 70% of your 1 rep max, doing like a 10 rep set. Those are going to be different, even though like we've talked about, the set level is what matters, the number of sets, but you can't go too low and not getting enough stimulating reps. And so we're going to get into this aspect. And then the strength level of the lifter, right? If you have someone that's advanced along and they're able now to squat 500 pounds for a set of 10 versus a beginner who's squatting 135 pounds per set of 10, that amount of stimulus and that amount of fatigue generated is a whole lot different. So that's going to have a lot different requirements for the amount of sets that you need and the quality of those sets. Then the frequency that you train. So fatigue will accumulate workout to workout. So there is a level, if you're training really close together, that fatigue might accumulate too high. And then if you're still carrying fatigue, you won't have as good motor unit recruitment. You won't be able to express that strength as much workout to workout. So your sets won't be as effective if you're training too frequently or you're just carrying a lot of fatigue. So that's how like the frequency aspect could matter. And then your rest periods. So a short rest period during your workout, you're generating an amount of fatigue, localized fatigue, right? The muscle gets tired. You jump back into a set, you just won't be able to do as many. But when you rest like an extra minute or two, you can get some extra reps because you're reducing fatigue, you're restoring glycogen levels, creatine phosphate levels. And so if you take these really short rest periods and you're not able to perform really well and generate a lot of good mechanical tension during the lift, then you will need more of those sets. So your sets won't be as effective. So we want to make your sets very effective. And then all the other variables we talked about in fatigue management, your sleep, nutrition, stress, those big 3 ones. If you're not checking the box on those, you're not going to be able to manage that fatigue. Fatigue stays high, your sets aren't going to be as quality, and you won't have as much stimulus workout to workout. So getting into absolute and relative intensity, because that's what we're talking about, why volume might change, what makes it effective. But what we really want to focus on is intensity, how hard you should train and how much weight you should be using within that training. So absolute effort. Should you train heavy or light? And so heavy, what is heavy? And that's could be relative to what you consider. Typically, over 75% of a 1 rep max we could consider heavy training. This would be like around a 10 rep max, or light, less than 75% of a 1 rep max. So that would be anything over 10 reps. It can be just as effective for hypertrophy as long as those sets are near failure. All right, so that's want to keep driving that home. Okay, heavy weights, so lifts that are greater than 75% of your 1 rep max. So once you get, I'd really say under probably 6 reps, are going to recruit high threshold motor units right away, like right off rep 1. You're going to have to recruit all muscle fiber to lift that weight because it's so heavy. So every rep is stimulating right away. Now light weights recruit high threshold motor units, but you have to build up some fatigue, and then those later reps will become more stimulating as you approach failure. So if you're going to do like a 15 rep set, those first few reps, they're not going to give you that much stimulus. There's something there. There's still tension on the muscle, but it takes until you can recruit the high threshold motor units and expose all fibers of tension, that's when it's going to become more stimulating. So that's the discrepancy between heavy weights and light weights. They can be just as effective. It just comes down to making sure you train hard. So it's all about getting enough stimulating reps. The hard reps are what matter. And we're going to talk about stimulating reps and effective reps and kind of what that means, and give y'all more of a conceptual look at it and how that might look in practice. So can you train too heavy? So like 1 to 5 rep max. Like, is that appropriate for bodybuilding? And it's great for strength training. Strength is very specific, right? So you need to do, if you want to get strong at bench press, you're going to need a bench press. If you want to lift heavy things, you're going to need to lift heavy things. And that sounds silly, but it's as simple as that. So if your goal is to increase your 1 rep max, you should be training with loads close to your 1 rep max. So doing sets of 3, sets of 5, that's going to drive up 1 rep max strength a lot more than training with sets of 10 and 15. Now, what is the problem with doing sets of 1 to 5? Well, we're going to talk about stimulating reps, and you might not be getting enough of them, and you just might have to do more of those sets. The other issues with sets of 1 to 5 is that they're really hard on joints and connective tissue. So it would be a limiting factor in the practicality aspect of using really low rep sets. The benefit is the reps are stimulating like right off the bat. Like a heavy set of 2 or 3, like every one of those reps is going to be stimulated for hypertrophy. Now, what about training too light? So like 20 to 30 rep max. It is effective for hypertrophy. You just have to take those sets all the way to failure. You might have more muscular endurance adaptations as well, which is perfectly fine. It does generate a lot of fatigue though, especially like mental fatigue and cardiometabolic fatigue as well. And it takes a lot of reps to get up to just those last few reps you need to stimulate growth. So think about like a set of 30 on a leg press, like maybe like 20 of those reps, 25 of those reps are just trying to get to the last 5 reps that are really stimulating for growth. And so all that work is going to expend a ton of energy and make a lot of fatigue for just a little bit of stimulus. But the benefit to high reps is that they're really low risk of injury. Like, not too many people like tear pecs off or blow out knees and stuff doing like a set of 30 on anything. It's usually like using something really, really heavy is when it does. So there is a place to use both within hypertrophy training, but the guts of our training should be in that 6 to 20 rep range. You could even narrow that down to like maybe 6 to 15 reps. That's where the majority of our work should probably be. And we could have a little bit 1 to 5 if we have some strength goals in mind. And we could also do some 20 to 30 if we ever need to like be managing injury prevention, or maybe that would be appropriate for different lifts as well. So talking about absolute strength, absolute intensity, we should also talk about hypertrophy and strength, and are they the same thing, right? So within within strength increase, what are the components of that? And for one is a muscle mass increase. Right, so if you increase the myofibrillar proteins in the muscle, you have a greater ability to create force. And we looked at these within our sarcomeres, right? Remember actin and myosin and their cross bridge formation. If you have more actin and myosin, you can lift more weight. It's really simple. There's also an increase in the connective tissue and passive tissue elements within muscle. So you're basically all the connective tissue that holds all the muscle together has to be increased in size to lift more load. So that is the one component of strength. So is it completely synonymous though? Because there's other ways to increase strength, but you might not be increasing muscle mass. And some of these are neuromuscular adaptations. So there's increase in neural drive, muscle activation, increase in fiber recruitment, and rate coding. So when you're brand new to training, you don't recruit fiber as efficiently as you are when you're trained. So you're then now able to recruit more muscle fiber right off the bat, off a set. And also rate coding, so how these motor units are firing. You can start firing motor units more quickly and quickly activating these fiber units. And then motor unit synchronization. So you have your motor units firing these muscle fibers, but now they're synchronized. They can all work together at one time to create greater strength. Then we have skill acquisition, so training specificity, right? Strength specific to movement performed. To get good at lifting heavy things, you gotta lift heavy things. So you'll have these neurological adaptations occur. It's kind of like upgrading the software of your computer, right? You're now able to process more data and you're able to recruit these fibers more efficiently. So you can get some quick strength gains just by learning the movements better and being able to recruit muscle fiber better. That does not mean you have more muscle fiber yet. So just because strength is increasing doesn't always mean that muscle mass is increasing. But it is a very good proxy. And I think once we're outside of our newbie gains, you pretty much have a lot of the neuromuscular adaptations and skills developed. Now, if you are increasing in strength, it is pretty indicative that it is muscle mass related. The other thing is, like, if you switch to lift up, and then you all of a sudden you have this big strength increase, like, oh man, I'm growing like crazy again. Like, no, there's probably is still a little bit of a learning component there. And usually you're a little hesitant adding in a new lift right away. Then you get comfortable with it and can then progress from there. So there is a psychological aspect to that component too. But I want just to make a point and show that within training, we can't just chase strength as our main progressor. It has to be with the right mindset that if strength is increasing over time, this may be a good indicator for hypertrophy. But it also could just be that we're getting stronger through neuromuscular changes. All right, so now to relative effort. So how hard you train. Train to failure or not training to failure. And so what are some different kinds of failure? There's one is technical failure. So just being able to, lift until form breakdown occurs. And if form breakdown occurs, you're now having to shift mechanics around and bring in other muscle groups to continue lifting the weight. So you might be able to get another rep, but you just have to change your form to do so. Then we have muscular failure, where form is unchanged, but you're just unable to form a concentric muscle contraction. So it's truly the muscle you're intending to train fails. You just cannot lift concentrically any longer. So I would say there is some wiggle room for technical failure. You can't live perfect all the time, right? So you might get a little shifty, and that could be okay. Even doing a bent over barbell row, there's a lot of moving components there. So there is some allowance for shifting of form. But otherwise, I stop the lift when form is technically broken, because that's when you're getting at risk for injury. So stop it at that point. Muscular failure is acceptable, and as you get more advanced and your technique is so precise, you can actually take movement, especially complicated movements, to the point of true muscular failure of where you're intending it to be at. Remember, if we want our biceps to grow, you don't want your technique to fail and you're now using shoulder and you're using your back and you're now squatting just to get your bicep curl up. The point is put tension in our biceps, so we want the biceps to fail. So it doesn't make sense to swing your form around just to get a rep. but the benefits of training to failure. So it's highly stimulating. So every rep, as you get closer to failure, you're moving up and up and up, every rep is more stimulating for growth. Now it might be kind of a curve, like here's a rep it stimulates, then it gets higher, and then it kind of not quite as high, and then you hit like this failure point and it's a little higher, but not as much. But every one of those reps is very stimulating. And I do firmly believe that those last reps are the reps that really make the impact in changing you. So pushing to that point, and so many people are so far from it that I'm so hesitant to not try to push people or tell people to use like a rep in reserve approach, because so many people are just so terrible at engaging. I'm going to talk about this. I don't want to get off on a tangent with you yet. So anyway, with training to failure, there's no stimulus left on the table. Like, you know, every set is everything you got. There was no holding back, so you know that you didn't do a set that maybe wouldn't be effective, right? If you didn't get to those last couple reps. You also always know your performance level. So week to week, you know where your strength is. If you did an all-out 10-rep set, you knew if that was better or worse than last week and what your recovery capacity was. So it's much more predictable once you're training like that. It's time efficient. So less sets are needed. So you could do a lower volume approach. You don't have to stand there and do 5-6 sets of a movement. The disadvantages. So although it is more stimulating, it also is a lot more fatiguing. So training to failure causes a lot of fatigue and a lot more recovery time. It's also a lot more muscular damage, which can be prolonged for up to 72 hours. So you might not be able to train again within 2 days because of the muscle damage occurred and the performance detriment that might be present. There's also more inter-workout performance drops potentially. So every set, since it is so stimulating and so fatiguing, that next set that you do might have more drop off. Now, if you're doing like, hey, I'm going to train here, I'm going to keep like 2 reps in the tank, 2 reps from failure, I can do another set, maybe I won't have as much drop off. Then I can do a third set and I wouldn't have as much drop off versus doing, an all out set, like 10 reps, and maybe the next set you only get like 7, and the next set you get like 3. Then there's our safety concerns on your more technical lifts. So doing like a barbell squat, taking a barbell squat to failure is stupid, all right? No one's crawling out of squat rack. Look at anyone around that's at advanced level. No one's squatting to failure in a barbell squat. We're all using some type of rep in reserve, or it's right there before failure. So and this is what gets me on people talking about training to failure. It's like, oh yeah, you got to take your lifts to failure. It's like most of the people around are not taking their sets to failure. We're taking them like right there, right before it, and we're completing good quality reps, and then we stop. It's a lot harder, grinder reps. So don't say like, if someone's knocks on like training to failure all the time, well, most of us aren't training to failure all the time. And I don't think you should be. I think the safety risk is not there, and you create so much recovery, a hole to dig out of it. There's certain lifts you can, right? And that's fine. But other lifts you just shouldn't do. I don't think you need to, or it's smart to do either. So let's talk about not training to failure. So reps in reserve. I know, I said I had to go into it. I'm not a huge proponent of reps in reserve because people are so poor at assessing where they're at, especially beginners, intermediates. Once you already take yourself there and you know the effort level you have to train at, you could use it, but I still don't think it's the optimal way to train. But there is some place for it, all right? So what is reps in reserve, or just the reps before you reach failure? So like a 0 RIR would be failure reached. This could also mean that you don't have any reps left. 1 RIR would be 1 rep before failure, 2 RIR, 2 reps before failure, and so on. And so in the literature, what we see is really less than a 3 RIR is pretty suboptimal for growth, right? So if you're just you have a set of 10, your 10 rep max, and you do 7 reps, you get a little stimulus out of it, but it's really just not hard enough to do much. So you need to take those sets closer to failure. And there's an argument that 0 to 2 RIR, you'll get the same amount of growth but create a lot less fatigue. But I would truly say that that claim lacks some evidence, especially at the more advanced level. So at the more advanced level, we don't have as many sets that we can add in because every set we're so strong, you're using so much load. Another set creates so much substantial more fatigue for the stimulus that it provides. And to train it like a 2 RIR, as you get farther away from failure when you're advanced, those sets are even less stimulating. So we need those last few reps to really progress in growth. And those are the reps that are going to matter. So I would say you need to get your strength way up there and get your effort level way up there to really stimulate growth. But the benefits of RIR is fatigue management. So if you do have times when you need to manage fatigue but you need some type of stimulus, you could do it. So this might be appropriate, like maybe your first week of training, where you're adding in new movements that you've never done before, and you're trying to gauge where they should be at, or you're learning technique, or you're a beginner, because a beginner needs to learn technique. It's an appropriate place to do it. It's another benefit. It's mentally less demanding. It takes a lot to go take a set all out to failure. It's not for everyone, right? And you have to enjoy your training. Remember, that's number one. So that's why I want to show you all this, because don't think that you must be low volume, high effort training if you hate it, right? If you hate it, do keep your RIR, a little bit higher, and be mentally less demanding per set, and you can do a few extra sets. Now, is this what I usually promote? No, but that's okay. It's still a way that you can train and make some result to happen. You can have higher sustained performance set to set. And also, it's safer on major, very technical lifts, like a squat or like an RDL or something like that. The disadvantages, many are poor estimators of RIR. They had a study where they had people estimate what their 10 rep max was and do it, and then they push them hard, and people are doing like 7 reps more than their estimated 10 rep max. Like, they're that far off, right? So for a lot of people, RIR, to tell them then, hey, do a 2 RIR, and then they're doing 8 reps when they could have done like 16 reps. It's like you're way off from getting any type of growth out of that. So you would have to teach someone what that effort level needs to be and what that RIR truly is at. Disadvantage too would be the stimulus might be underdosed. If you're just for that same reason, if you're not able to truly gauge what your rep and reserve is, you might not even getting any stimulating reps. Or if you are, you could hit your set of 8 when you're 10 rep on your 10 rep max. Maybe that's a few stimulating reps. Then you do another set of RIR of 2. But maybe since you have some fatigue present now, those reps aren't quite as stimulating. Then your next set, those reps aren't as stimulating. So although maybe you have as many stimulating reps as that guy training really hard closer to failure, they might not cause as much stimulus. Then your performance level is a little bit more unknown. I think you can get good practicing with RIR and have an idea, but it's still a pretty subjective idea of what your strength is at that moment and performance level, so you can compare week to week. So I'm talking all about these stimulating reps. Let's look at some examples of stimulating reps regarding training effort. All right, so we're going to make an assumption here that the last 5 reps of a set are the stimulating reps for growth. And I'd encourage you, if you want to read more on this and who really, actually the first one that I thought was myo reps by Boris Frageli. I'm sorry, I've totally butchered his last name. Then I also read more from Chris Beardsley on effective reps and stimulating reps. And I will say, this is not something has been studied in the literature as far as seeing if this is truly the way to be counting, but it's so complicated to do. But there's a lot of assumptions with using RIR or training to failure, and that every rep is created equal. And so it might not be. But let's like break down some of these because I want you to look at simulating reps. So we're going to assume the last 5 reps, and this is what Chris Beardsley has come up with and is his like model and theory of effective reps, is that the last 5 reps of a set are the ones that are really stimulating for growth. So if you did 4 sets of 10 at an RIR of 3, so essentially this would be doing like 40 reps, but you have only 8 stimulating reps. So this 4 sets of 10 would be like your 13 rep max, right? And although you do 40 reps, since we're counting only the last 5 reps are stimulating to failure, we're doing a 3 RR, so you take away those 3 reps, you're left with 2 stimulating reps per set. So it's going to be 8 stimulating reps, 4 sets of 10. Our next example, let's do 3 sets of 10, but let's train a little closer to failure, a 2 RIR. So now 2 RIR, you're getting those, we're taking 2 reps away, we have 3 reps that are getting closer to failure. All right, so 3 times 3, you get 9 stimulating reps, but you're doing 30 reps total of work. Our next example, so 2 sets of 10, but take it to failure. So the last 5 reps we're assuming are stimulating reps. So those are going to be, now for 2 sets, 10 stimulating reps, and you're doing 20 reps total. So you can see here, taking sets closer to failure, you can easily get more stimulating reps than potentially using an RIR format. But you just have to do more sets to get those stimulating reps. Another example, so 2 sets of 4. So we're getting down to like our absolute intensities, right? So if you're doing heavy weight or lighter loads, why does that matter? Because I've talked about this. If doing like a really heavy weight for like 2 reps, why is that set not as productive for hypertrophy as sets of 8 or sets of 10? And that's because the amount of stimulating reps they stimulate right off the bat. So we're assuming the last 5 reps to failure of stimulating 2 sets of 4, well, you're only doing 4 reps. So you're going to have 8 stimulating reps. So that same 2 sets of 4 reps isn't getting quite as much growth potentially as doing 2 sets of 10 because you can get more volume. So going too low in reps, you'll have to do more sets as well. So our other thing, going really, really high in reps. Light loads. So a 30 rep max, like 30% of your 1 rep max, 40% of your 1 rep max. So 2 sets of 30 to failure. Oh man, brutal. Be 60 reps total that you perform. The last 5 reps are maybe around stimulating. That's 10 stimulating reps. So see how much more work you have to do to get those stimulating reps done. So really here for volume, it is the number of sets, but what probably is more important is the number of effective stimulating reps that you do. And we can't quantify this, or how are we going to count this in training? It's practically, the practicality of it and application is just too hard. Like a drop set, how do you count a drop set? How do you count a rest pause set? It's just easier just to count the number of hard sets you do for volume. But like I said, all these stimulating reps are not created equal. So each rep closer to failure creates higher unit recruitment and peak tensions and durations of those tensions. So each rep is more effective. So as we get like closer to that low RIR of 3, RIR of 2, each one of these, we're already at high threshold motor unit activation, but now that tension level is just constant. You're constantly exposing those muscles to that high amount of tension. And that duration is also a driver for hypertrophy, not just a single moment of high tension level. Each rep closer to failure would also be generating more fatigue than those early on reps. So that is something to consider for fatigue management and recovery. And then each subsequent set can be less effective from CNS fatigue, preventing decreased motor unit recruitment as you approach failure. So say you do 4 sets of 10 at a 2 RIR, every set that you do is going to generate a certain amount of fatigue, and those same stimulating reps on the later sets are not going to be as stimulating. So they don't all just count up the same. So they're even different set to set. The same with failure. Like you might get some really stimulating reps in your failure set, but then the next set, since you're going to create a ton of fatigue in that one failure set, those stimulating reps won't be really effective. So, and then but I will say the more advanced that you get, the less stimulation you get in those early on reps. So if we say the last 5 reps are stimulating, potentially you could argue that maybe as you get advanced, maybe it's only the last 4, or maybe even the last 3. So how important is it going to be to take those sets close to that RIR of 0? I'd say it'd be very, very important. So as you get to an advanced level, even upper intermediate, like you need to take your sets all out. You need to learn to go there. RIR, I think, is just leaving too much on the table, and you need to train hard and take it to that place. And then from there, we're going to drive our lifts up and get strong and progress our lifts. So recommendations. So bringing this all back, we talked about training heavy, training light, training really hard, not training as hard. What are the recommendations? So for absolute effort, so the how heavy you're lifting, the external resistance, 75% of your volume, so 75% of the amount of sets that you do should be in the 6 to 15 rep range. So this is 60 to 85% of your 1 rep max. You're going to get the most bang for the buck out of this rep range. You'll get all the stimulating reps, but also not a ton of fatigue from having to do too many reps. The remainder of your volume, 25%, could be in the 1 to 6 rep range or the 15 to 25 rep range. And I think that comes down to being goal specific, but also risk dependent as well. So if you have days where you're like, man, I feel super beat up, well, hey, train the higher rep range. Or if you're like, gosh, I really want to drive up my strength, like that's an important goal for me, train in the 1 to 6 rep range. Now, relative effort. So how hard you train. So for a beginner, the focus should always be on technique and form and just becoming excellent at those movements. And I put on here a 3 to 1 RIR in major compound lifts. And I have RIR for a beginner because if someone came into the gym and they have never lifted a weight before, would you put them on a squat and tell them just keep going till you can't lift it anymore? Like, hell no, you wouldn't. Like they might just blow their back out and their spine out right there on the floor. Like that would be so irresponsible for me to tell you right now that you just need to go all out. Like I can't do that for a beginner. Like there has to be a gauge. Usually they will be so far from 3 RIR anyway, but what I want to emphasize here is like make their sets hard, make their form perfect, and take that as far as they're able to go and stop them before the technique breaks down. That might be a 3 RIR, but as they're progressing, they might get closer to that 1 RIR. From a beginner, something to consider is that, man, they're going to grow off anything. Like they just pick up a bar and they're going to get a ton of stimulus. So they just don't need to get to that failure point just yet. And I think there's a lot of rationale of why they shouldn't be either. But you're going to have to keep progressing them. So we're going to talk about progression, but the failure piece will take care of itself because every time they come in the gym, they're going to add weight, they're going to add reps, add weight, add reps. Their sets are going to get harder and harder and harder. At some point, they're going to reach that high effort level. But get the most from the least when you're a beginner. You don't want to go in there and just have to train to failure all out right off the bat. You just don't need to yet. On isolation lifts, where there are less technical requirements, like a bicep curl, like you don't have to go and learn how to do a bicep curl. It's fairly self-explanatory, or even some machine presses. That might be a lift where you can take them closer to that failure point so they can start learning that effort level and learning where failure is or what that should feel like, or how far away they might be. But that would be my thing for someone who's a beginner. We talked about what a beginner is. For one, a beginner is someone who's never touched a weight before. This also might be someone just a couple months into their training, which this might be just the first 6 months of someone training. A beginner is also someone who can progress their lifts every single time they walk in the gym. Weight, reps, everything's moving up. And I know people say like, oh, well, What about, when you're doing a cycle and you're progressing your lifts week to week? Like, we're not considering this. This is someone that is like brand new to training. For the intermediate to advanced lifter, so I would say a 2 to 0 RIR on major compound lifts, and it's going to be safety dependent. I am more so on the fact of like trying to really take your lifts close to that 1-0 RIR. I want you completing successful reps, not going for stuff that you absolutely know without a doubt you're going to miss. Because the fatigue you're going to generate, it's just not worth it in my opinion. Now a hard grinder rep, hell yes, take it. But to go for something that's just like no way, there's not that benefit is just, and risk is just too high. And then some lifts are just not appropriate too, like we've talked about before. I've popped hamstrings doing RDLs, trying to take my sets too far. It's like just pull back a rep. It's as simple as that. Like, it's going to be a freaking hard set. And then, if you're find movements where you're locked in place, like doing a hack squat and leg press or something like that, where you're locked in your standardized form and you can just take those sets all the way. And that's what I prefer and do. All right. So, and then isolation lifts, the amount of fatigue you generate from isolation lift is so low. It's more localized. So make those sets hard, take them there. But that's my saying, don't go for reps that are way, way out there in left field to what you can't get. Live to fight another day. So training intensity is also going to be lift dependent. And so we kind of talked about this. So the rep range you should use and the amount of effort level that you should be using in these sets. So like lower body free weight, 5 to 12 reps. You could go less. I'm just regarding more of the hypertrophy rep range. And maybe 1 to 2 RIR in general, right? So this might be like those last hard grinder reps. They're there to do safely, like a back squat. Upper body free weight, 5 to 15 reps is a good spot. So bench press, incline barbell press, your barbell rows. You can take those sets pretty hard, but usually technique starts to break down or the risk is there. Like, with a flat barbell bench, you start bouncing it, or you don't have a spotter. I think as you get more advanced, that changes though. You can take those sets farther, but in general, that's some recommendations. Lower body machines, these might be more appropriate for like a little bit higher rep ranges. Maybe leg press, a hack squat, or even upper body machine work, 6 to 20 reps. Because if you get really high rep, it starts getting really hard to coordinate. Like doing a back squat for 20 reps, like holy crap, your technique, it's more of a cardiovascular challenge, right, than actually hitting muscular failure. So a machine might be more appropriate for it. Then lower body isolation, the rep range kind of opens up more. You can do 8 to 25 reps. Like doing a leg extension for 20, 25 reps, that could be reasonable. A back squat for 25 reps, no, not too reasonable. And upper body isolation, so like chest flies or a bicep curl, a tricep push down, those are safe to take for failure. And you could definitely do it for a higher rep range. All right, so our recommendations for volume. So we've gone through, right? I wanted to put together intensity, hard sets, right? The goal is to train with optimal stimulus and be able to recover from it. We want our sets that we do to be very, very hard and effective. From that point on, then we can now discuss how many sets you should be doing. So beginners and novice. 5 to 10 sets per muscle group per week. So this is going to be over, and this is off the literature. And I have still in context that this is going to change. These are just averages. So it's just a place to kind of start if you don't know. If you know where your volume is, you know where you're training at, well, we'll have to wait till you get to your progression of are you doing too many sets or are you doing too little, and how to adjust that based on recovery. We'll get there so you know. But in general, you can look at your plan now and see if you're close around these averages. And so these are averages based off the literature of what most people have grown optimally around. So it doesn't mean you have to do less or you have to do more. But typically beginners are 5 to 10 sets per muscle group per week off of 7 days. So maybe you had a split that rotated over a 10-day period. Well, you could average it out and see what your set volume would be over 7 days. And that's per muscle group. So it's not per muscle group per workout, it's over a whole week. So if you train biceps twice a week, you'd add up how many sets you do, and that would be for that 7-day period. Intermediate advanced could be 8 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. Can you grow on less? Yes, you can. That might be your optimal growth rate? It might not be. We looked at remember the volume curve that we looked at earlier? Some sets make you grow. A little bit more sets might make you grow more. Too many sets might make you grow less. So there's a sweet spot to be. This is just an average. And how hard you train is going to determine where you might need to lay on this average, if it's less or more. So like I said, these are just averages of starting point. I would recommend starting at the low end and moving up from there. Start at the low end, make the most of your sets, then add in from there. I don't want you to just do a bunch of shit volume. Like, that's not the point here. The point is to do high quality volume sets. And then if you need more, we can add in. But that is not my first go-to. And then so for this volume, so this is just our starting point, and you'll have to move volume up and down based on what phase you're in and based on your recovery. So our auto-regulation strategies for volume are going to be coming up in our lectures that we're probably like in our second or third coming up here. How to change volume based on recovery. Because we'll have times when calories are low, we're doing more cardio, we have to adjust volume, adjust the stimulus to manage recovery. So we'll move volume around. But this gives us a good guideline for maybe a baseline that we should be at. But we have to consider overlap in muscles trained. So what does it mean, 8 sets for a muscle group per week? How does that look for an exercise? Like, how do we contextualize that? So we can count volume, and I put together a chart just to give you an idea. And it's not something to overanalyze, and you don't need to, what matters here is that you count it the way that is standardized. Just like when we did our macronutrients, our food, if you want to weigh your food cooked or weigh it raw, like dry, like that's fine as long as it's standardized, and that's always the way that you do it. If you don't want to count your sets of biceps in doing a pull down, don't count them. Just so you know like what you're at and if you're able to recover, and then what you're adding in. So we can count all these things differently. So I will say in the research world for counting volume, they count it 1 set across every muscle group for anything that gets trained. So for like a squat variation, like say a barbell squat, it'd be a set for your quads, a set for your glutes, a set for your erectors. Everything that's contributing is getting counted. Like a hip hinge, like a deadlift. You might counting that, like it might be a set for your hamstrings, a set of glutes, a set of erectors, a set of traps. They're all getting some type of stimulation, but to different degrees, right? A vertical pull, like a pull down. Your lats are getting trained, your rear delts are working, and your biceps. We count sets for all those. A horizontal push, like a bench press. Your pecs working, your front delts working, your triceps working. That's a set for all those muscle groups. Now the argument gets down to like an exercise specific, like a bench press might be more stimulating for your pec than it is for your tricep, right? It depends like what your failure point is first. Is it triceps give out, does your chest give out, or when you're squatting, is it your back that's giving out more? Well, that's probably what's getting the biggest stimulus and more fatigue over your quads. So these are things to kind of weigh out. That's why I say don't overanalyze it, just so you have a rough idea of you know where your volume is. And then you could argue like arm work in these, it might be counted as like half sets, like doing a lat pull down. Like some people count this like half a set for biceps, and then that's why you need to add in more sets. But that's why I say to you, just standardize how you want to count volume. In the research, like when we're saying like 8 sets per muscle group, this is how it gets counted. And a lot of times it's looking at your major compound lifts. So they're looking at quads or like hamstrings or and then when you see these really high volumes, like 30 sets of muscle group, they're counting every single thing across. Like, so they did like 15 sets of back. So that's 15 sets of biceps. And they did another like 10 sets of curls. So then they did 25 sets of bicep work. And you're thinking like, holy shit, they did 25 sets of biceps. It's like, well, no, this is how they're counting it. It just comes across differently. So, we can just count things how you need to quantify volume. But when I give you the recommendation for 8 sets of bicep work, this is how I would count it, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to break this down for you too. But first we have to get into training frequency. So frequency is how we organize volume and intensity. So all volume in one training session. So you put out, like you had 10 sets, we're going to put them all in one day. It's not the same as all volume spread across 3 sessions, right? Because every set we do in a workout becomes less effective. You generate more fatigue. So that volume is going to have a lot different stimulus and generate a ton more fatigue versus taking that volume, say like 3 sets on this day, we're going to do 3 sets on this other day and 3 sets this day. You're fresher, right? You go and you feel good. You can lift heavier. You can get a great stimulus. You'll generate some fatigue, but you're going to train again like 2 days later. You have another good stimulus, some fatigue, and then you hit it again. Versus one day where you try to give a ton of stimulus, that stimulus starts getting less effective, but you still get just as much fatigue, probably even more. Then how long? Then can you train again in 2 days later? No. How long does protein synthesis stay elevated after a workout? Maybe like 48 hours. Okay, so you stimulate protein synthesis for 48 hours after a workout, but you can't train that muscle again for like a week because it's so trashed. Does that make sense? Are you still growing for a week after you train? Well, no, what does make more sense is stimulate it, get some growth, and then hit it again when protein synthesis has decreased and your muscles recovered. So our goal is to maximize the stimulus in a workout and then limit any extra work that's done in a workout that just creates more fatigue and turns into junk volume. You end up just doing more work and it's just making you more tired. And that high fatigue causes that long time course to recover. So I want you to always remember, stimulate, recover, and it needs to be sustainable. That's our always goal. Stimulate, high stimulus. We want high mechanical tension, be able to lift as hard and heavy as we can, and be able to recover from that and train again frequently, and usually training again within 48 to 72 hours. It's a good frequency to train at. As you get more advanced, that might need to go a little bit farther. So as I get more advanced, usually it's maybe every 5 days. But within research, higher frequency training has been shown to be more effective. So what are the benefits of higher training frequencies? Lower volume per session. So it keeps mechanical loading high and quality high. And that's the driver of hypertrophy. Remember, mechanical tension. Lower fatigue generated per session. So it's not so many sets that just are getting less effective and more fatigue. We're keeping fatigue managed. You're also getting more frequent stimulation of protein synthesis, which means you're going to grow more. Imagine if you just trained back once a week, and you did that's 4 times a month. You only stimulated back growth 4 times a month, versus someone hitting back twice a week. They're stimulating back 8 times a month. They're going to grow a lot faster than you are. So higher training frequency, that just makes sense. It even improves strength gains compared to low frequency volume matched training. Even for hypertrophy, higher training frequencies independent of volume. This was one of Greg Nuckols' meta-analysis that he did, looking at all the data and crunching numbers and seeing what was effective. Is higher frequency training, regardless of how much volume was done, was more effective for growth. So higher training frequencies for beginners. So for a beginner, you won't need as many hard sets to grow, right? A beginner, they're going to require a very low stimulus amount, and they're just going to respond. And since they're not lifting large weights, you're not lifting really heavy, it's not going to generate much fatigue. So you can be able to train a lot more frequent than someone that's really advanced. I'll say that's how you advance fast as beginners. So these beginners jumping on like single body part splits, training like legs once a week and back once a week, like you're selling yourself short. Like you're going to grow so much more training frequently with more muscle groups in a session. Now, as you get more advanced, you'll need to train closer to failure. You would have gotten stronger, so now you're having to use a lot more weight. The reps are getting, the sets are just getting more taxing. And so they're going to generate a lot more fatigue than someone that has just started out. You'll also probably need more volume per session. So you can no longer just grow off one set. One set of chest, like that's not going to cut it. You might need a few, you're going to need a few more. So your sets are going to be more taxing. You need more of them. And so that also means you're probably going to need more recovery days and probably less muscle groups trained per session. So that's how that advancement might change. So you can train frequently as your beginner, but you might have to train a little bit less frequent as an advanced, or decrease the amount of muscle groups you're training per session and increase the volume per muscle group. So what are the training frequency recommendations? So training each muscle 2 to 4 times a week. It's muscle group dependent. So quads, like for instance, get really sore. Like you're not going to squat 4 times a week, or doing RDLs. Maybe like biceps, you could train that often, or like side delts. Like how often do your side delts get sore? That's a muscle group you could have a higher frequency with. But in general, twice a week for most muscle groups is a good, solid recommendation. And then, of course, training level dependent. So if you're a beginner, you can train more frequently. As you get more advanced, you might be able to keep that frequency, but you're going to have to moderate the per session volume per muscle group. So a training split progression. And this is what I recommend. Is for a beginner to do a full body split. Train every muscle group. I usually would say at least 3 days a week. You can maybe do every other day, but you can have to moderate recovery. This might be for 6 to 12 months when you first start lifting. If someone brand new to lifting, doing everything right, 6 to 12 months, you'll make the most progress you can doing something like this. Once you've done that, you'll need more volume per session to grow. At some point as a beginner, you just won't be growing off this anymore. Your sets won't be increasing. You're no longer increasing reps and weight week to week. You need more volume. You need more stimulus. But you need to manage fatigue as well. So you can't have this session that's like a full body workout where you got to warm up, do all these warm ups, and you build up these big weights. Like your session's going to be eventually like 3 hours long. So you have to break up your sessions. And so the progression from there, I would go to an upper lower split. Upper lower, off day, upper lower, maybe off day, something like that. You can get very, very far on an upper lower split. That might last you for 1 to 2 years. And I think most people are probably going to be closer to this intermediate level and need to stay on an upper split for a while. Don't think moving up, you're going to grow more. If you're a beginner, start with the full body split. That's how you're going to grow the fastest. When you finally have to move up to the upper lower split, then do so. But don't think you're gaining an advantage by starting off with something, what is labeled advanced. You actually don't want to be advanced. It's hard to grow. You want it easy to grow. So get the most from the least. So advanced. So if you've done everything right and you nailed everything, your sleep, your recovery, your nutrition, you've progressed your lifts up, you've done these things, after 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, you might need to further split up these sessions because now your upper sessions are just too long. You're lifting too much weight. By the end of your training, at the end of your upper body day, your lifts are just, you're exhausted. There's nothing left. Or end of your lower body day, it's just way too much. That's when you should move to a push-pull legs split. So we now separate that volume out more. If you get even more advanced, you might reach a point where you actually have the muscle mass that you want, which is rare. Or you might start seeing discrepancies in your physique. This is something like you're getting to the pro level, right? And body parts are lagging. You might have a modified push-pull legs. And then you might even see people doing more of a body part split. But that is when you're at the pinnacle, when you're so far up there. But let's look at some of these layouts and how we might lay out our set volume. So this is a beginner setup. So this is 3 days per week, full body, off day, full body, off day, full body. Then you have the weekend off. It could be that way. So you're going to do 2 to 3 sets per muscle group. And we'll look at this. I'm going to lay out more routines. This is just kind of getting down to the, just like I said, the nuts and bolts of things here. So if we do 2 to 3 sets, 3 times a week, that's going to be 6 to 9 sets for a muscle group for the week. That fits right within our recommendations for a beginner of 5 to 10 sets. You will grow off this and grow substantially fast. The next step up from there, which if you're between that beginner starting to get to an intermediate, maybe you just want to train 4 days a week, I understand. You could do full body, off day, full body, off day. Split up one full body day into upper, lower. Off day, repeat. So that's a way we can start adding in a little bit more volume and breaking up some sessions. So from there, moving up, you might move to our intermediate setup, where you need that next volume level up. So 4 days per week. So we have upper, lower, off, upper, lower, off, off. You could remove that last off day, but I think most people need it. You might be doing 3 to 5 sets per muscle group here, twice a week. So that is 6 to 10 sets per week. That still falls within our recommendation. You might need a little bit more. That might be great. You might be on the lower end, and that's okay too. It's going to depend on how you're executing your lifts and how hard you're training. The next move up from there, you could go 5 days per week. This is kind of the intermediate of push-pull legs and upper-lower. So you could do pull-push legs, have an off day, upper-lower, have an off day, then repeat. I will say too, like some of this comes down to like your adherence and what you are available to train. Some people can only train 3 days a week. So how would I train? Well, depending on your level, you might do full body. Maybe it is just you do upper, lower, upper, and that's your week of training. You need that much stimulus to grow. Will you grow? Yes. Is it optimal? At some point, you're going to reach a plateau. But between these intermediate setups, you could still have the same volume level doing push-pull legs, upper, lower, as doing upper, lower, upper, lower. Just your pull-push legs might just be really short sessions, and that could be fine. So moving up from there, the advanced level. So from advanced level, we go pull-push legs. And you're going to need more volume per session to grow, and you'll need longer recovery times. So this is a 3-on-1 off split. So you hit pull, 4 to 8 sessions on a pull day. Same with push, 4 to 8 sessions for a muscle group, 4 to 8 on legs, off day, repeat. So you're hitting every muscle group every 4 days. So you do need that longer recovery time now that you're more advanced. Another setup might be 2-on-1 off. So push, pull, off, legs push off, legs pull off. Every muscle group is still hit about every 4 days. You just might need, and some spread out a little bit more than that. So it's like every 4 days, sometimes it's every 5 days. So again, this is depending on your recovery capacity. If you can't do 3-on-1 off, which a lot of people can't, or maybe you've gotten to a point where you're so strong and you just need the extra rest days, you go on to a 2-on-1 off split. There's also a 5-day rotation. So push, pull, off, legs, off. So leg day is extremely taxing for a lot of people, especially once you get strong. And having that off day before legs and right after can be a large benefit of managing fatigue. This is usually what I'm running as a baseline setup. And I'll move between other things based on my need and my recovery capacity. And then we have specialization cycles once you are advanced. So these are push-pull leg routines, but with emphasis in certain areas. So one, we could have a back focus. Now guys, I don't want you to do a specialization cycle if you're a beginner or if you're early intermediate. Like your goal is to put on as much tissue as possible. That's to be growing overall. Like if you're under 200 pounds, you don't need like an arm day. You don't need to focus on bringing back up. You need to focus on bringing your whole entire body up. Then when you're advanced, you're like, wow, this area it's starting to lag. You could run just a training phase of emphasis here. This might not be your split always. Maybe if it's that weak. But this would be a setup for once you're at that higher advanced level, which it's still a push day, a pull day, off day, legs, pull, off. So now you're hitting pull a lot more frequently. You'd have pull pretty much every 3 days you'd be hitting pull. And your other days would spread out just a little bit, so there's less emphasis on legs and push. So that first pull day might be more horizontal focused, so like row focused. Then that last pull day, since it's close to legs, might just be vertical pull focused and chest braced rows. So it's not so taxing because recovery, you're probably feeling a little bit fatigued that next day. You might have a leg focused specialization cycle. So you'd start with legs, you'd have like a ham and back day focus. So this would be like RDLs, doing some leg curls. Maybe you'd have even a leg extension or something on that day, and then some rows. Push day, off day, then you have legs, you do quads. Then you still have your normal pull day, which might be vertical focus then. But there is more volume and focus towards legs. This might even be a focus where you might have an advanced female doing something like this that has more focus for glutes. And so you can put more glute work into another leg day for them, and they still need that same push-pull work. Then you could have a push focus. So if you need to bring up chest or shoulders or tries, you can do pull, push, off day, legs, push. That other next push day might be more like delt and try because they can handle a little bit more volume than chest. And maybe you have a little bit of chest work on that day. This could even change of how you order your exercise and your exercise selection. That's our next lecture. We're going to get into that. Finally, an arm focus. For you guys out there that just want the arm day, here it is. Push, pull, arms, legs, off, repeat. And this is getting pretty close to like a single body part split. I'm not even going to put it on a single body part split here because I don't think most people would really need them. But basically, the arm focus day is what a lot of people do. It's like you have chest, shoulders, back, arms, legs. Like that's pretty much a single body part split. We're just calling it push and pull. That throws off some people. So you have pull day, then you do arms. Doing biceps after pull is not really an issue. Then you have your tricep work. Then you'd have 3 days before you hit push again, so triceps would be recovered in time. So training split selection. So like I said, you don't want to be advanced, guys. Move up as you need to when you need more stimulus. And recovery isn't then an issue. Split selection is going to be based off your level and your level to recover. That choice of what you choose for your split is going to determine the number of lifts that you need to do that day, the number of sets per session, also the session duration. So all things to keep in mind. And that goes back to our lecture about adherence, right? So if you only have an hour of training, well, you're going to have to think about your selection if you're trying to do full body workouts that are going to take you 3 hours long. That might not be appropriate for you to be adherent to. So summary of recommendations. Hard sets are the sets that will count towards volume. And the final reps of those sets are the ones that matter the most. Guys, the hard reps at the end of your sets, getting close to that failure point, those are the reps that matter. Those are the reps that will change you. That is what we are establishing as our standardized criteria for what is a set. Volume. So just remind, 5 to 10 and 8 to 20 sets per muscle group for beginner and intermediate advanced respectively. And that is just going to change. Like we talked about, these are just averages. Intensity, 75% of sets, 6 to 15 reps. Remainder of sets, 1 to 6 or 15 to 20. For beginner, 3 to 0 RIR. Intermediate advanced, 2 to 0 RIR. We've already mentioned that is lift dependent and safety dependent. But our first thing, hard sets taken all the way as far as we can take them. So that's what we're trying to do here. Training frequency, each muscle should be trained 2 to 4 times per week. So let's look at an example of this. This won't be the full example. At the very end of all this training, I'm going to have the full body routines laid out, the intermediate routines, the upper lower splits, push pull. I'll have that all detailed out so you can see just an example. But I'm trying to build you guys with the tools you need to make your own plans and be able to think through this thought process for yourself. So we're going to look at just the volume, intensity, frequency setup for an upper body and an upper lower split. And this, what you see here, is an upper body day done twice a week, all right? And so we'll start this day, say our shoulders, we think shoulders are weak. So sure, start with what you're weakest at. A shoulder press variation, we'll do 2 sets. First set, work set, hard set, 6 to 10 reps, then a back off set of 10 to 15 reps. A chest press variation, so maybe some type of bench press, 2 sets, 6 to 10 reps, then 10 to 15 reps as a back off set. A tricep compound variation, so a close grip bench, a dip, 2 sets, 6 to 10, then 10 to 15. A horizontal row. So maybe that is a barbell row or single arm dumbbell row or some type of machine row. Vertical pull, like a pull down. Same thing, 2 sets, 6 to 10, 10 to 15 reps, back off set. A lateral variation. So the thing with side delts is that you will get some side delt volume in your shoulder press, some of your chest press, all your rows. So they're all going to get stimulated, but still bodybuilding and with the component there, I think you should add on some lateral variation even in the upper lower split. So 2 sets. Then we're going to do some bicep isolation. So per week volume. So we're going to multiply all these sets times 2. So chest, 8 sets. So how are we counting 8 sets of chest? Well, there's 2 sets here. If we're going to do a dip or a close grip bench, well, that's going to be another 2 sets of chest. So that's 4 sets total for chest. 8 sets a week. We're training it twice a week. How about shoulders? We have 12 sets here for shoulders. We have a shoulder press. We're going to have a chest press. We have another tricep press. That's 6 sets there, so that's 12 sets. Our triceps you can count just the exact same way as shoulders. How about for back? 2 rows, 2 vertical pulls. That's 8 sets a week. Our side delt will get 4 sets. Biceps is going to be 10 sets. So this is dependent on how you want to count biceps. But that's also why you only need to do 2 sets of isolation or even train them at all at first. During your rows, 2 sets here for biceps, 2 sets here for biceps, then 2 sets as isolation. We could count spinal erectors in this, just to keep in mind axial loading and if we're having issues going into our leg day. So this would be our 2 sets maybe for our horizontal row. If we're doing like a bent over barbell row. So does that all meet our recommendations? We're training every muscle twice a week. We have 8, somewhere between 8 to 20 sets, pretty much for all muscle groups, depending on how you want to count them. A few caveats there, like with side delts, but we're all within these volume recommendations. What about our rep ranges? The majority of our work is 6 to 15 reps. Then we have some higher rep work as well for isolation movements. So that all fits within our hypertrophy tenets for volume, intensity, and frequency. So when you look at a routine, you can now pick these things out. Are they doing enough volume? Roundabout. Are the intensities appropriate? And what about the frequencies? I left off here RIR, so I want you just doing hard sets. So you could prescribe an RIR to these, but again, I would say just push yourself until you're within form and, like we've already talked about. So lower body, let's look at our lower body routine. A leg curl variation. So I think a leg curl going into a compound quad movement is not going to affect it, but also it's a safety thing as well. And the movements usually just feel better, especially before we get into like a deadlift or something. But this is going to come for our next lecture. So leg curl variation. Set at 10-15, 15-20. A quad compound, this could be a leg press, this could be a squat. 2 sets, 6 to 10, then 10-15 back off set. A hip hinge variation, like a deadlift. Maybe this is a hip thrust. same thing, 2 sets, a single leg quad compound. So a lunge, a split squat, maybe a single leg press, an adduction isolation movement, a calf raise variation, then an ab variation. So how does this all add up? So per week volume quads, 8 sets. We have 2 sets of squatting, 2 sets of a single leg, that totals up to 8. What about glutes? So for glutes, we're gonna hit it on our squat, we're gonna hit them on our hip hinge. We'll also do it on our single leg variation. So 6 sets in this workout, so that's gonna be 12 sets total. Hamstrings, 8 sets. We have 2 sets in a leg curl, 2 sets in a hip hinge. 8 sets. Erectors, so 6 to 8, just depending on what lifts you're picking. So it could be in your quad compound, maybe you're doing a barbell squat, you're gonna get some erectors. If you're doing a deadlift, you're gonna get some erector work in. So that might be, you might even be counting your single leg quad compound work. Calves, 6 sets, and abs would be 6 sets total for the week. So this all pretty much falls within our volume recommendations on average. From here, we're gonna determine, is that enough or is it not enough? Can you recover from this amount? Are the exercises right choices for you? These are all things we start ironing down in our next lectures. And we'll get into that. Picking your exercises, the orders, and the progression schemes of what we should be doing and adjusting based on recovery. I know this was a long lecture, guys. Thanks for hanging in there, but it's such an important one for hypertrophy programming. I hope you'd enjoyed it, and please let me know if you have any questions on it.